Well, hello, men. Welcome to Messages for Men. This is a podcast about men and for men and some of the challenges we do face. My last podcast was on guilt, and I hope you have a chance to view that. And if you're a first-time listener, first-time viewer, thank you very much. I hope you have a chance to like, subscribe, and make a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Like I said, last time was on guilt, and this one's on shame. Shame is an extremely powerful emotion. Maybe one of the most difficult that men have to overcome. But what's the difference, really, real quick? What's the difference between guilt and shame? And at least in my mind, I'll explain it. So if you haven't had a chance to see your kids all week, you may feel guilty about that. You may feel bad. You feel bad about something. Shame would tell you you are bad. Shame would tell you, for example, in this case, you're a bad father. You're a bad person. You should have never had kids. So the difference is I think is quite stark in terms of how we internalize it. But is shame always bad? Is there such thing as healthy shame? I think there is. I think there's two sides to this coin. I think there's healthy shame and there's toxic shame. I think in my life, there's many times where shame has actually helped me to produce better and do more. Yeah, let me give you an example real quick. I think it's an example you can relate to. Several years ago, I had some friends, high school buddies, invite me to pheasant hunt in North Dakota. I was excited, hadn't pheasant hunted before, but how hard could it be? I've shot a shotgun before. So I threw my 12 gauge in the back of the truck and some shells, jumped in my truck and headed to North Dakota. Well, unfortunately, it was kind of a bleak year. The population was down, not a lot of birds. And so if you're going to shoot, you better hit something because there's not a lot of opportunities. So after about 2 hours of walking the fence line, bird got up and I took a shot. It seemed like the bird was only about a couple feet in front of me, but guess what? Yeah, I missed. And I missed all day long. I was either high or low or shot way behind the bird. Finally, I had a buddy of mine that I've known since the 6th grade and went to high school with and college roommate of mine. He turned to me and said, "Brad, what the hell's wrong with you?" Did he shame me? Yeah, absolutely. The boys shamed me. I felt humiliated and ashamed. They went home with birds that evening and I went home with nothing. But let me tell you what it did for me. The next year, it made me go back and skeet shoot and clay shoot and work on the skill at which I needed to get better at. And so the following year, I had a lot more fun because I actually shot some birds. And believe it or not, the same guy who shamed me said to me, "Brad, it's nice to see your wife taught you how to shoot a shotgun." That's how men compliment each other, by the way. But men, there's a dark side to shame. It's a very powerful emotion, and what I've seen in my life is this emotion can actually destroy men. It robs them of joy and happiness and relationships and productivity. It really holds them back from being the man that they truly want to be. So let's get into this for a little bit and discuss our shame and maybe some things we can do to help ourselves. I've seen young men deal with shame, not knowing what they are or who they are, and the shame surrounding that because society has put upon them that they're bad, and they begin to believe that they're bad. It's a narrative that we believe about ourselves within our subconscious. It's a pathway we've developed mentally that we struggle to overcome. In many regards, shame is first developed in early childhood. Because remember, shame, you weren't born with that emotion. You learned that emotion. And the problem is, men, this trauma can carry over into relationships where we can be very standoffish and we don't connect with people well. We don't let people in because we cannot be vulnerable because of our shame. Even with our jobs, for example, we may not be as productive as we could be or should be because we feel like we're not good enough. We're not worthy. We're bad men. This narrative is hurting men. I think about the time I've spent in small group with men. And when men get vulnerable and we really talk about life and what we feel, we talk about guilt and shame, it's really powerful. But it's also heartbreaking. I've seen men talk about the shame of the father wound and what their fathers have done to them. When men talk about the shame they have around the abuse of their wife or ex-wife, either physically or emotionally. I've seen men talk about their children and how they weren't there for them and how neglectful they may have been and the shame surrounding that. I've seen young men who've had to bear the burden of the narrative that you're toxic because you're a man, that you're a misogynist, that you're a sexist and a racist. I've seen young men go underground, not knowing where to go because the narrative society's imposed on them. I've seen men suffer too much from suicide, drug abuse, violent crimes, either the perpetrator or the victim. I've seen men struggle. But men, together, we've got to figure this out. How do we overcome shame? Maybe we had a father who told us we were worthless, weren't good. Maybe we had a father who was physically abusive. Maybe we had a caregiver who didn't pay attention to us, didn't meet our needs, ignored us. We felt neglected. We felt inconsistent parenting. We felt trauma in the sense that maybe some of us were emotionally, physically, and even sexually abused. And this narrative that we aren't good, we're broken and we're bad, we're unworthy, that carries over, men. And that shame carries forward into life. And it does affect our lives in its entirety. So men, the shame we feel is pervasive, and it can affect every aspect of our lives. Think about in relationships when you don't feel worthy, when you don't feel lovable, when you feel broken and not good enough. How vulnerable can you really be in a relationship? For example, an intimate relationship with a woman. Will that relationship ever be fulfilling for you? And how about friends? Good buddies that you can't become vulnerable with because you feel unworthy and you feel shame. And you feel like it's unmasculating. It's your ego and pride saying, I don't want to discuss that because it makes me look weak as a man. So what do we do with our shame, men? Well, many times, what do? We seek ways to self-soothe, to numb. Maybe we drink too much. Maybe we take pills. Maybe we watch too much porn. Maybe we game all night long, scroll through social media. Maybe we do things to make us forget about our shame and our pain. But it doesn't go away, does it, men? It's still pervasive and it's still there. And do understand, men, unless we can get a handle on our shame and the narrative that's been created in our minds and reboot the operating system so we can think about ourselves differently, we will always battle shame. But I'm here as an encouraging word to say a couple things for us real quick. First of all, we need to have some self-compassion, some self-forgiveness, and possibly seek forgiveness from a higher power. Because we've got to change the wiring within our minds to believe differently about ourselves. We need to have some self-compassion, some self-forgiveness, to understand in our humanness we're not going to be perfect. And there's things we've done in our past that we're ashamed of. There's things we've done in our past we feel guilty about. But we can change that narrative, and we can work to get better. Why not try this, men? Why not try to get together with men? Get to know them and become vulnerable. Talk about the guilt and shame you have in your lives. Open it up, expose it. Let it be seen. And then we can deal with it. Or men, if it's really pervasive, why not seek professional help? There are really some good mental health counselors out there. They can help you overcome your shame. Because unless we learn to identify our shame, we're not going to be able to overcome it. And unless we can learn to rewire the way we think about ourselves, we will always be stuck in a rut. If society asks you what you are and you can't answer it, society will determine who you are. Don't let society do that. Let's figure out who we are. Let's get rid of the shame. Let's create a new narrative about how wonderful manhood is and what masculinity means and the good things we can bring about. Let's change the narrative so we can change our lives. Let's help each other, lean on each other, love one another, and be open to discussions with men. We can do that. But brothers, we got to help each other get there. Thanks for your time today, men. I do appreciate it. I hope it's been beneficial. And I hope shame is in the past for you for the rest of your life. Thanks again. Appreciate your time.